Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about a recent controversy involving BJP leaders and Tipu Sultan. We also talk about the problem of illegal sand mining in Punjab. But first, we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. Today marks exactly 1 year since Russia declared war on Ukraine. And since that time, both sides have been unwilling to back down, and talks of settlement still seem very unlikely. Meanwhile, however, millions of people have been forced to flee their homes and have lost their lives, including thousands of Ukrainian civilians, and even children for that matter. We now speak to Indian Express's associate editor Shubhajit Roy about where things stand after a year of this war.
Well, the war is in a deadlock. So Russia obviously thought in the initial days that it will be quick and Kyiv will fall within days, possibly weeks. But that was, as we know now, it's been a year and there's no end in sight. So that was a gross strategic miscalculation by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine, it was playing the David versus Goliath game, has been supported by the US, by the European partners. Essentially, the West have corralled around or rallied behind Ukraine. Initially, there was some bit of lag in terms of coordination in the initial days, weeks. But I think very quickly, NATO allies, all the NATO partners, European partners, US, they all got the act together and were able to supply sophisticated weaponry as well as intelligence to the Ukrainian side.
And Shubhajit, during this time, we've also seen Russian troops struggle a lot, right? For example, we've seen images of a 40-mile-long Russian convoy which has been facing food shortages, fuel shortages.
Yeah, so it's a classic example of two forms of war that have been waged by the two sides. So Russia went out for an all-out war where it attacked through its infantry, artillery, it moved its troops and targeted not just the military establishment but also cities and civilian population. Ukrainian side, on the other hand, has gone for what is more pinpointed, more classic warfare method, which is attacking the military assets of the Russian armed forces. So essentially targeting their tanks, targeting their troops. And it got help from the West in terms of sophisticated technology, in terms of drones or UAVs as we know them. So that played out, and over a period of time, it's been also, Russia has seen shortage of men, fuel, as well as there's been attrition. Whereas Ukraine has got all the help, Russia actually hasn't got much help, even from its closest partners. Ukraine actually has been formidable because of the reason US and the Western partners, European partners, have really come together and provided its crucial intelligence about Russian troop movements, as well as sophisticated weaponry to fight this war.
And despite these struggles, Russia is not willing to back down. In fact, recently it gave a nuclear warning to the West regarding Ukraine and suspended a bilateral nuclear arms treaty. So could you talk about the position that Russia and specifically Putin finds himself in right now?
So right now, Russia really doesn't have an off-ramp or an exit route, as they say in classic conflict situations. So he doesn't have a face saver. Whereas Ukraine has been able to stall the advance and it has in fact regained some of the territory. But Ukraine is fighting the war on its soil, on its territory. It has not gone beyond its territory and not fighting the war in Russia's territory. So that's a classic difference between the two sides' approaches. So if President Putin was confident a year ago of getting the job done in a matter of days or weeks, I think a year down the line, he is a disappointed man in Kremlin. But Putin, I think, also counting on fatigue that might set in amongst the Western partners. That a war fatigue where because of the rise in energy prices, commodity prices, the Western partners, he probably thinks that they might not stay the course and drop the ball at some point and would want Ukraine to negotiate with Russia and call it an end to the war. So that's where the Russian President Putin would be seeing this war a year down the line.
And talking about negotiations, is some kind of settlement on the table at all?
So, as you know, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he proposed a 10-point plan for ending the war, and his proposals were pretty simple. Russia has to vacate Ukrainian territory, the troops have to leave, there should be a probe on international crimes, the human rights violations, war crimes that have been committed. And all these points were sort of put on the table by the Ukrainian president. There have been some talks, but as Western interlocutors and the German NSA was in town, I think about 10 days back, and what he told us was something interesting, that there are no shortage of mediators, but there is a shortage of willingness on part of Russia. I think so willingness to end the war is in short supply right now.
Yeah, in fact, this reminds me of something that an expert recently said, which is that Ukraine rejects Russia's invasion but does not reject the existence of Russia, whereas Russia doesn't accept the very notion of Ukraine as a country.
Yeah, I mean, Russia believes that Ukraine has been part of Russian empire, Russian territory, and as someone very knowledgeable amongst the Western diplomats told me a few weeks ago, that Ukraine is as much part of Russia if you think India is part of United Kingdom. I mean, essentially, if a colony is seen to be a part of its imperialist power, then that's the logic that works. But that's not how it is. So there are those sentiments that are there in Moscow's side and Russian mind, Vladimir Putin's mind, and he's been very vocal and very open about it, very publicly articulated these thoughts, these arguments, and that's how he sees, that's his worldview. But Ukraine completely rejects that worldview.
You mentioned the support that Ukraine has got from its allies in the West. So could you talk about what they are focusing on right now as far as the war is concerned?
Right now, I think the focus purely is to stop the war, to end the war, and probably build a deterrence. So you've seen countries sort of expressing interest in joining the NATO, as well as countries like Germany, which had a post-World War II, it took a very passive or pacifist sort of role in terms of its military outlook, has changed course. So these are changes that have happened because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And those are the trend lines I think we will see in the near term and in the long term. Also, the European partners are also trying to decouple or diversify away from dependence on Russian energy. And that is a sort of a big shift that is happening right now in Europe, which has relied on Russian energy, oil and gas for decades now. So that is again aimed at denying Russia the leverage, as well as not funding the war machine that Russia operates.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about India. India, from the very beginning, has been careful about what it says about Russia and this war. For example, it has been reluctant to condemn Russia's action or wording anything too strongly. So tell us why India has made that decision and whether it has changed over this last year.
So India has sort of taken a position that it has maintained a very tightrope walk, a diplomatic balance between the two sides, the West versus the Russia. Because both sides, it has strategic partners involved. As you know, that 60 to 70% of Indian military hardware is sourced from Russia. It's of Soviet Union origin and Russian origin. And the legacy is so much that the dependence is so high that India can't decouple or move away or diversify overnight. On the other hand, India depends on the US as well as the Europe as well for defense needs as well as capital and tech needs. So it has strategic partners on both sides. So it has maintained a very nuanced position for the last 1 year. So it has abstained in almost all the resolutions at the UN where the effort was to condemn Russia or, by the Western partners. But it has underlined 2-3 elements. One is how India called for respect for UN Charter, and then respect for territorial integrity and territorial sovereignty. And it has also, in 2 or 3 occasions or elements have also been, one is that it has condemned the Bucha massacre where innocent civilians were killed, which was a very, very humanitarian or human rights call that India took. And the other thing that India called was for an international probe into the Bucha massacre incident.
Recent reports of civilian killings in Bucha are deeply disturbing. We unequivocally condemn these killings and support the call for an independent investigation.
Yeah, and this was a bit of a deviation from that tight rope walk, right?
Exactly. So if you really carefully see these statements and analyze, this is without explicitly condemning or criticizing Russia, the Indian side has expressed its displeasure, and that was conveyed in as many terms by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Samarkand on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in September 2022, when he said that this is not the era of war. On the other hand, it also kept pushing for more energy transactions. So it has bought more oil than ever before from Russia. So it has seen and it has justified it for its economic impact that it cushions, because India cannot afford a higher energy price. So 3 prices, food, fuel, fertilizer prices have gone up in the last 1 year because of the war. And India has positioned its concerns on behalf of the global south as well. That while the war is being fought in Europe, the global south, which is the community of more than 100 countries who are less developed or underdeveloped countries and developing countries, they are feeling the pinch of the war because of the rise in prices. So these are the multiple layers in which India has sort of reacted. And it's a very nuanced response India has crafted over the last 1 year.
And next we talk about Tipu Sultan, who has been part of a news controversy yet again. Earlier this month, Karnataka BJP chief Nalin Kumar Katil said that Tipu Sultan was the symbol of anti-Hindu politics. And last week, another senior minister of the ruling BJP government said that the leader of the opposition and former chief minister Siddaramaiah should be finished off just like Tipu Sultan.
Maji Siddaramaiah avarannu Tipu Sultan ರೀತಿ ಒಡೆದು ಹಾಕಬೇಕು. ಒಡೆದಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಒಡೆದಾಕಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿಡ್ತೀರಾ? ಒಡೆದಾಕಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿಡ್ತೀರಾ? ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಸಿದ್ದರಾಮಯ್ಯ.
Now, this is not the first time that such things have been said about the former ruler of the Mysore kingdom. Politicians for some years now have been saying things against him. But is it true that he was actually anti-Hindu? Is there evidence that can show us that? To answer this, we speak to Adrija Roychowdhury, who is part of Indian Express's research team. Adrija, most of us remember Tipu Sultan from our old history textbooks. And since it is very likely that a lot of us have forgotten a lot of important details, could you refresh our memory and tell us who he was?
So, Tipu Sultan was basically the Maharaja of Mysore kingdom, which is in today's date is in Karnataka. And he ruled this kingdom somewhere in the last part of the 18th century. Specifically, the dates are between 1782 and 1799. By this time, the East India Company, it was already present in India. Just for perspective, the Battle of Plassey was fought in 1757. And after that, slowly the East India Company was making its way through the subcontinent. The Mughal Empire was there, but it was only there in name. It was almost in a declining shape, and the regional powers like the Mysore kingdom were becoming stronger. Now, Tipu was also the son of Hyder Ali, who was basically a military commander under the Wodeyar dynasty, who were initially the rulers of the Mysore kingdom. And then he rose through the ranks and became the de facto ruler of the state sometime from the mid of the 18th century.
And Adrija, what is the reason that we remember and study about him even today?
Tipu's rule was a very significant period of Indian history. For instance, he was very well known for his strong military skills. In fact, he had been trained in military tactics by the French officers who were employed by his father. So during his rule, he carried out these ruthless wars of invasion against the several other kingdoms of South India, like in Travancore, like the Maratha territories, like Malabar, the Kodagu region. But what he's best known for is that of being like the last frontier of challenge against the British. In fact, among the British, he was really notorious, as he was known as this merciless tyrant who had been causing real trouble to them. And defeating him was very important for the British, and they celebrated it as this huge victory. Over the years, and more so during the freedom struggle in India, Tipu sort of became this icon. He was seen as one of the earliest freedom fighters of India.
Because he strongly pushed back against the British and was a strong opponent to them?
Yes, absolutely.
And over the years, many BJP leaders have been framing him as a religious bigot. Leaders have been saying that he was anti-Hindu and anti-Kannada. But based on historical evidence, do we know whether that was actually the case, whether he was specifically anti-Hindu?
Tipu was a complex figure, and there is no simple way to understand his rule from the standpoint of 21st century politics. So, for instance, it is actually well documented that he did carry out this massacre when he invaded Malabar. And the massacre was carried out using fairly religious rhetoric, Similarly, in Mangalore, for instance, the Kannada Christians there, they too, they look at him as like an enemy of theirs, who had persecuted a lot of the Christian community in Mangalore and forcibly converted quite a few of them. This kind of evidence is there both in historical records as well as in popular memory of the people. But at the same time, we need to look at two things over here. One is that historians would also tell you that this was nothing extraordinary. Most powerful rulers of the time, be it the Portuguese, the Marathas, the French, or anyone else, they did carry out similar invasions and massacre in other kingdoms as well.
So basically during that time, this was a common strategy.
Exactly. This was a common strategy during that time. It was just the way politics was at that period. And can we call him a bigot or anti-Hindu for that reason? I'm not completely sure. Because, also there is evidence of him protecting Hindu temples as well. So for instance, there is this famous episode of this shrine in Chikmagalur district of Karnataka, which he had protected from the Maratha army too. So it's a little complicated. The best way to perhaps understand Tipu would be to look at him as this shrewd politician who massacred sometime, who persecuted sometime, or who protected some things at some point, just basis what he thought would be politically advantageous to him. And we also need to understand that this idea of Tipu being a bigot has a lot to do with the way the British saw him and the way they framed him. And that is how, a lot of it was carried into popular memory as well.
And why do you think it was in the interest of the British to frame him this way?
We need to understand that by the late 18th century, both Hyder Ali, Tipu's father, and he himself, they were very much a part of British popular consciousness. So they were seen as this, big challenge, they were obstructing imperial ambitions. So for instance, historian Kate Brittlebank, who is one of the, leading authorities on Tipu Sultan, in her book, she writes about how these stories of attacks on British forces by Tipu Sultan's men and that the torture of British prisoners of war, these were, published as in gory details in the British newspapers of the time. And often they were exaggerated too. And, with time, they were seen as these, the most famous villains from India, And Tipu Sultan, in many ways, he was like the quintessential Oriental despot, and he was like frequently referred to as Tipu the tyrant. That was a common name, the epithet that was used for him. So once the British managed to kill him in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War that happens in 1799, it sort of, the British was celebrating the killing of Tipu. And the best evidence of this is the fact that this episode of killing Tipu, it became a subject of numerous British paintings and popular fiction and things like that. And soon enough, the British also started using Tipu's death as sort of a moral justification for their acts of aggression in South Asia.
So framing him in a way that, look, he was an oppressor, people under him were miserable, and we took care of it.
Yes, exactly. So one good way of understanding this is that, these figures like Charles Cornwallis or Richard Wellesley, these were governors general in India before Tipu's time. And for several years before Tipu was killed, these figures were heavily criticized for their imperial policies in India. But after Tipu's death, suddenly there was a change in attitude towards them. And their policies were seen as necessary for maintaining peace in the region. And one other thing that the British do is also to make Tipu appear as this oppressor of his own population. So this way they managed to build this narrative that their own invasion in this region was sort of necessary to protect the people from the tyranny of Tipu Sultan.
Right, and it seems that they were successful in doing that because we see this narrative exist even today. And right now we're talking about Tipu Sultan because of this latest controversy. But it's not just Tipu, right? Other Muslim rulers have also been criticized by politicians over the years. So could you talk about how this latest controversy involving Tipu Sultan fits into that larger pattern?
Yes, and the best example of this would perhaps be Aurangzeb, the Mughal ruler. And he's again one of those figures from Indian history whose name is frequently used by politicians for their own political gains. And he's also labeled as this bigot and this anti-Hindu ruler who carried out persecutions, converted several, broke down temples and things like that. And once again, like Tipu, Aurangzeb too was a complex character. Historians, more so modern day historians, have been debating and researching on his policies more to look at the complexities of this. And again, we need to understand Aurangzeb's rule as well as something that was happening way back centuries ago, and they need to be located, contextualized in the politics of the time then.
And Adrija, the other thing we heard this BJP leader say was that Tipu Sultan was not killed by the British, but rather by these two Gauda chieftains. And we've seen similar claims like that in the past as well. But what does historical evidence tell us?
See, there is complete historical evidence of the fact that the British had killed Tipu Sultan, and there is actually no debate around this. All leading authorities, biographers of Tipu Sultan have written about this episode of the Anglo-Mysore War. But this controversy around the Gauda chieftains, it is actually somewhere we can look at it as popular memory taking over what we see as historically documented. This community is again, a tribal military community like the Kodavas, and there is perhaps, a popular consciousness about the negative role that Tipu had played in their community's history. And these stories of, who killed Tipu and all, and things like that are often brought up to seek legitimacy or validation for their own community. That definitely, as per as historical documentation goes, it is well documented that the British had killed Tipu Sultan.
And in the end, we talk about a murder which took place in Punjab. Gurcharan Singh, a 60-year-old farmer, was killed in the Dera Basi area when he tried to stop people from illegally mining sand near his village. Now, recently, the Punjab government had taken a strong stand against mining activities. But despite this, it is still being practiced regularly in many areas, including the region where Guru Charan Singh was killed. And his murder has once again put a spotlight on this problem. To talk about how big of an issue illegal sand mining is in the state, my colleague Utsa Sarmin spoke to Indian Express's Jagdeep Singh Deep.
So Jagdeep, before we talk about the sand mining problem, can you tell us about the murder of this farmer?
So it happened on February 16 at around 11 p.m. when Gurcharan Singh, a farm leader, he went to a place in his village Badana. He was present at his home. He heard some noises of machines. He went to a place which is Shamlat land, which is called the village common land, where he found that some people were digging the sand from that land, which is illegal. So he tried to stop them in the process, the people who were on tractors and trailers, and there was a poking machine also, they ran over him and he died on the spot. So police registered a case and three persons have been arrested. Two tractor trailers were recovered. But the main accused, his name is Harvinder Singh Gagu, he is on the run. So police are saying that they are conducting the raids to nab the accused. We have spoken to Derabasi Assistant Superintendent of Police Darpan Aluwalia. She told us that the raids were on and they will soon nab the prime accused.
And the family of Gurcharan Singh has claimed that the village Sarpanch was also involved in this illegal mining operation. So tell us more about these claims.
Yeah, sure. I have spoken to the son of Gurcharan Singh. His name is Bhupinder Singh. Bhupinder Singh is the complainant in the FIR as well. He told the Indian Express that the mining was going on the Shamlat land. The Sarpanch might be knowing about it. So he directly accused the village Sarpanch. His name is Dhalvinder Singh. And he also alleged that this illegal activity was going on for the past 4 years. He had accused that the Sarpanch should also be booked. Then we have spoken to the Sarpanch who denied the allegations, saying that he has nothing to do with this case. He also said that where the mining was taking place, it is the land which belongs to three villages, and he was not aware of the illegal activities going on there.
Right, and we understand that this particular village is known for illegal sand mining. And this is a big issue in other parts of Punjab as well. So, can you tell just how big this problem really is?
See, the illegal sand mining is a big phenomena. It is basically cash-rich illegal activity. A lot of big fishes are involved into this illegal activity for the past many years in Punjab, and throughout the elections in the state, it had been one of the biggest issues because people were buying the sand from a particular mafia, from a particular group involved into illegal sand mining. And in border areas too, the illegal sand mining had taken place. So, see, in the last around 15 to 16 years, Punjab have seen surge in real estate market. And with the real estate market, a lot of builders have come up to Mohali, to the big cities in Punjab. So there is need of sand and gravel for the construction purpose. And this illegal mining was never regulated in the past. People would used to buy the sand at very cheaper rates around 10 to 15 years ago. But when this boom in real estate had come in Punjab, sand had become a very essential commodity, we would like to say. And the influential people in Punjab, they got involved into illegal sand mining. What they were doing is they were just digging the sand from the natural resources like rivers and seasonal rivulets. Then they would sell the sand at the desired prices to the builders. And now, since it is cash rich, there is no billings and all. So it is illegal. And these illegal miners do not pay anything to the government, which makes it illegal. And they make hefty amounts by selling the sand and gravel. So at one point, it was a big thing in Punjab due to legal mining. The common people were affected because they could not get the sand and gravel at cheaper prices. So it continued for 15, 16 years and it is still there. But yes, the Punjab government is claiming that they are now reining in and also arresting the big fishes in Punjab.
And apart from arresting the big miners, do we know what other measures the government is taking to address the concerns around this issue?
So the first measure had been taken recently that the government has started selling this sand at a controlled price in Punjab. They had opened two such markets. One is in Mohali district and other is in Ludhiana district, which was recently launched. So the government is saying that the farmer should order the sand and or they can go and buy from the government run facility. So the government says this thing will help the common people to get the sand at lower prices than they were getting in the past. The other measure is the government had banned the mining activities in the state so that the illegal miners do not carry on their activities rampantly. So the thing is that with the first measure, government is claiming that they had controlled the illegal mining as of now, and now in the future they are going to take more measures. One is opening the government controlled markets in this across the state, and then they will also start the legal mining activities which would meet the demand also.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.